ladies and gentlemen, and very welcome to this webinar on green recovery. And my name is Alexander Mastrovico. I'm the head of sustainability at a Swedish company called Scania here in Hong Kong, as well as the chairman of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce's Sustainability Committee. And I just want to go through some housekeeping rules before we kick off the session with some opening remarks. And this session will be 1 hour and 15 minutes. It will mostly be a panel discussion with 4 excellent panelists who I will introduce to you shortly. We will, however, start the session with a few opening remarks by the Consul General of Sweden to Hong Kong and Macau, Per Augustsson. And before we do that, however, I would like to thank the Consulate General for their support to organize this session, as well as the Swedish Chamber of Commerce here in Hong Kong for organizing it as well. And since this will be a panel discussion, we are very much welcoming questions from the audience. And you will be able to post questions either via the Q&A function in Zoom or through the chat. If you post it via the Q&A function, only we, as the organizers, will see your question. If you post it via the chat function, everybody will see your question. But they're both fine, and we will have a look at both of those things. And just one more point to note is that this session will be recorded, and it's also broadcast live on Facebook right now. So with that said, it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce our Consul General of Sweden to Hong Kong and Macau, Per Augustsson, to give a few opening remarks to introduce this session. So the stage is yours, Per. Very welcome to this webinar.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you out in the green forests. It looks very nice. First, I want to say we're still in the pandemic. It's caused a lot of suffering, and it's still going on. It's also been devastating, of course, to the global economy. Now, it's important to look forward towards a recovery that will not be easy or straightforward, but it can be an opportunity to think in new ways. It's a chance to push for more sustainable societies and solutions. We've seen that the Swedish government has allocated 9.7 billion Swedish crowns in the next year's budget to green recovery initiatives, such as industry transition, biodiversity, sustainable transport, energy efficiency, and climate action. And the idea, of course, is that a green transition should be the basis for the post-pandemic recovery. Sweden, as you know, is a leader in innovation, digital technologies, sustainable and climate neutral solutions. And our companies not only offer sustainable solutions, but are also leaders in transparency and corporate social responsibility. So it was very timely, I must say, when the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in October published a policy paper on green recovery, a paper that calls for a green dimension in Hong Kong's continued growth, urging the government not to miss this opportunity, and pointing out that Swedish companies and individuals stand ready to support in this work. We've also heard from the chief executive last week about measures and initiatives here in Hong Kong to bolster the economy, update the climate action plan, climate neutrality 2050, work towards a cleaner and greener Hong Kong. So there's a lot of important and exciting work ahead. I'm very much looking forward to tonight's discussion on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Per, for those words. And if there's anything that we should take away, which is directly related to our discussion, it's that sustainable solutions, sustainable behaviors, sustainable ways of organizing our societies will be the foundation for post-pandemic recovery. And this will be the topic of our discussion today. We want to explore, first of all, why is there a need for a green recovery? What is it? What does it mean? Which are the industries and areas of society that are affected by this? What kind of policies needs to be made from a government perspective, and how does private enterprise need to change and adapt to become more resilient and also cater for a different post-pandemic world? Now, we will also look at good examples from all over the world, and in particular in Sweden, but also from the European Union and elsewhere. And in order to accurately explore this topic, we have 4 fantastic panelists with us here today, and they all provide 4 very, very different perspectives on this topic. So I will introduce our panelists, and I'll start with, as I see them on my screen, start with Patrick Fung, who is the CEO of Clean Air Network, which is an NGO here in Hong Kong, which deals with particularly air pollution questions, but I would say most urban livability issues as well. Then we have Simon Ng, who is the Policy and Research Director for the Business Environment Council, which is Hong Kong's, I would say, largest membership organization for private enterprise, focusing specifically on sustainability issues. Then we have Anna Zhang, who is a consultant with Business Sweden, which is the Swedish trade and invest organization, which is present all over the world. And Anna is not only working as a consultant at Business Sweden, she is also the vice chair of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce's Sustainability Committee, and she has been the lead author of our position paper on green recovery. So she will be able to tell us all about that. And finally then, and last but definitely not least, we have Karin Hearn, who is partner, co-founder and chief sustainability officer with East Capital, which is an asset manager originated in Sweden, and Karin is active here in Hong Kong as well. So anyways, we can't do a big hand for you, but I will give you a big hand. So very welcome to this discussion. Now, with that said, I believe we can launch straight into the discussion. And I mentioned, and Per mentioned, that sustainable solutions will be the foundation for post-pandemic recovery. Sustainable solutions for post-pandemic recovery means, to some extent, green solutions, but the concept is much wider than that. But we are focusing on green solutions. And since it's for a recovery, it's a green recovery. It makes sense when you hear it, but I think we still might not grasp very much in detail what it is. Perhaps Anna, you can start with telling us, especially since you were part in authoring this position paper on green recovery. What is it and why do we need it?
Great. Thank you, Alexander, for this very good introduction, and very pleased to be here today to talk about green recovery. So what are we really talking about? I mean, first of all, I would like to start with what is economic recovery, because apart from just addressing this immediate health crisis that we have right now and limiting the short-term economic damages, we're also wondering, how are these governments around the world responding to the economic downturn? And what are the kind of measures that they introduce to stimulate the economy out of the crisis towards a recovery, towards the future? And there are certain things that governments can do and introduce to stimulate economies. They can introduce stimulus and relief packages, which most governments have done so far. These can target specific industries and sectors, relieve the sectors that are most damaged right now by the lockdown, for example. They can also introduce structural reforms to reform their markets, invest in very important long-term projects such as infrastructure. And essentially, it's all about how to create jobs, the jobs that are lost, and also how to plan for future sustainable economies. And then this is where the green aspect comes in. So how can governments make these economic stimulus measures as green and beneficial for the economies as possible? And also to transition the economies, to make them less dependent on fossil fuel and transition them towards a more low carbon economy permanently for the future. And one example is for governments to spend on green infrastructure. So building renewable energy capacity. In that way, it can both boost the economy, but also create new jobs. So the whole idea is to not go back to business as usual as it was before, but rather to really take this opportunity, as Per Augustsson also mentioned, see this as an opportunity to transition the economies and the societies. Some good examples we've seen so far on a global level is definitely from the European Union. So what the leaders of the member states did back in March was to call for a green transition as part of the pandemic's recovery plan. And then under the new European Commission's new president, they introduced the European Green Deal, which is part of Europe's new growth strategy going forward, where they've been very clear on attaching green strings, green conditions, and even for the Economic Recovery Fund, earmarking certain percentage of it that is going only towards green measures and climate action. So that's really good examples of how it can be done to both prioritize economic growth, but also do it in a way that is sustainable and invest in the right sectors, like green transportation, renewable energy. And then we also have other countries like South Korea, the US, and China, major economies that also have green parts of their economic stimulus packages that we've seen so far, although it's just a limited share of it, whereas the majority still is supporting high carbon industries. But yeah, so these are different measures that governments can do and why it is important for us right now.
Good. And we will return to those specific industries and the specific measures later. I wanted to pitch this question over to Patrick, because Clean Air Network, you also published a position paper on green recovery, more or less on the same date as the Swedish Chamber. And what was it from your point of view and looking at what was happening in Hong Kong that spurred you to put these recommendations together, and how do you see this topic being received here in Hong Kong?
Well, I think first of all, we have to understand why we need a recovery. So it must be something like a crisis. So I think this term green recovery starts from back in 2008. At that time, there's an economic and financial crisis. And then people talk about, hey, how about we recover with a sustainable prospect? This is something that in this COVID, I think not only Hong Kong, but also around the world, we have seen the importance of recover economically and socially while achieving a longer term, longer lasting environmental and health well-being. And compared to the crisis in 2008, this crisis for COVID is something that, everybody understands the importance of public health. And that's why I think for governments worldwide, they would seize that chance. They don't waste the crisis to put forward the scheme that might have lacked the general stakeholder support or public support in the past. But they would seize the chance from COVID to invite or mobilize or energize the stakeholder to do more. I think in Hong Kong, we are in this transition situation now. On one hand, there are lots of discussion over the past decade on greener building, greener transport, greener energy. However, we do need that kind of momentum to push it forward. And from the policy address we saw from Hong Kong SARCE, there was mention, as mentioned by Pierre, on the carbon neutrality or the national target for carbon neutrality for 2060. These are the external factors that push the momentum forward. But we do look forward to see more effort to be done by the Hong Kong SAR government.
in your mind, just to follow up, do you see that the government sees this as a key method of building a more resilient economy and more high quality sustainable jobs for the future as well?
Yeah, I think the global trend is heading that way. Hong Kong as a global city, we are heading to that direction as well. And in the past, there are quite some, dynamics and discussion, but not a strong action in the past. But now I think the government should seize that chance. And the stakeholders in the society, including us, we should try to push it.
Good. Thank you, Patrick. Now, I want to direct another question then, and this is for you, Corinne. And when you look at, for example, the European Union's strategy for a Green Deal, as they call it, they are, of course, focusing on what needs to be done in different industries and different polluting sectors of society. But they have then one method on how to enable these transformations in these different industries, and that's the finance aspect. And in order to understand like how many of these activities can be achieved, what is the role of finance in a green recovery?
Yes, so first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry for not having beautiful forest in the background. I love trees, so I should be the one to have it, but at least I'm enjoying looking at you guys. Finance is key. And I'm not saying that because I work in finance. I'm saying that you basically need money for everything. Money is the only commodity that you need for absolutely every sector, every industry in the world. So what is the role of finance in the green recovery? I would highlight 3 different roles. The first one is the actual funding, because I think everybody realizes that this is going to cost a lot of money to reset the global growth, but also to make sure that we have actually a successful transition to low carbon economy. We are getting numbers now from different investment banks or different NGOs about how much it will cost, for instance, for China to become carbon neutral by the year 2060. The last numbers I saw was like $24 trillion US. So it's basically 26 actually. It is twice the size of the world economy, the world GDP of China. So money is needed. A second reason why finance is extremely important is what I would say is the fact that you mobilize capital. Nobody will be able to finance that by themselves. Even the richest governments won't be able to do that. So you mobilize capital equity markets, you mobilize new products. There's a number of, I'll be happy to talk a bit more about it, but a number of very interesting initiatives such as sustainability linked bonds, for instance. And we are seeing more of that. And clearly this is really important. And the third part is about the direction. So with money, you direct because people need money, companies need money. And if we are able to really reset the financial sectors so that money goes in the right direction, money goes to companies which are part of the solution, money goes to countries which are acting in these processes of greening the brown or further greening their already economy, then you have a very powerful lever for change, and that's where it's very important. I'd like to add a bit on this note. We are in a situation of crisis, and when we're talking about recovery, there's a bit of it's going to be, as I said, it's going to be very costly, but we also have to think in terms of opportunities. So recently we saw a very interesting report by CDP, which is an interesting association which works with disclosure of climate risk for companies around the world, saying that yes, climate risk could be basically already valued at $1 trillion US for companies around the world, and these are not properly assessed. But at the same time, they were saying the opportunities in terms of because of climate adaptation and climate mitigation would be $2 trillion US. So here again, a positive impact about this green finance direction, so to say.
Good. Thank you, Karin. Thank you very much for that brief walkthrough of green finance. Lastly, then, when we're touching upon the basics of a green recovery, I would like to invite you, Simon, to share a little bit. And you have been working with sustainability policy in Hong Kong for many, many years. So you've seen what works, what doesn't work, and you're very knowledgeable about the particularities of long-term policy making here in Hong Kong. Now, when we're looking at European or even Swedish examples, or even other examples from other Asian nations of how they're introducing a large green component to their stimulus packages, is that model viable for Hong Kong, or are there certain particularities here that we need to adapt to?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me tonight, because I think it's a great opportunity to share our thoughts on green recovery and to learn together. And to your question, Alexander, I think in principle there shouldn't be any difference in terms of how we roll out, or the government is to roll out these green recovery plans. But I think maybe something that we have to take notice of here in Hong Kong is I guess, whatever the government is going to roll out in terms of a recovery plan and stimulus, the support from the business sector is very important. And if we look at it from, the opposite angle, actually, if the business sector is asking for the government to provide, policy support to help them become more sustainable in the long term, to build resilience, and to try to support their long-term vision, then I think the business sector and government policy can go hand in hand in the right direction. So if you look at what is happening in Europe, or in particular in Sweden, I think it's very clear that the government is laying out a clear policy direction for the business sector to then invest and to move into those long-term vision and investment. Whereas in Hong Kong, I think this is something that we need perhaps to do a bit more in terms of convincing the business sector that, actually this is the way to go. And I can see a lot of change in recent years for different reasons. I think Karin talked about investments and money, and then giving direction. I think that's important. So if investors are actually asking companies to think about long-term sustainability, then definitely this will have a good impact on government policy and also on business action. So in Hong Kong, I think if the government can work very closely with the business sector, that will certainly improve and propel the way the government is putting forward the recovery plan, and what actually is required to help the business to move forward as well.
Good. And you have been involved in the Sustainable Development Council's advisory body, which gave the recommendation to the current administration to set 2050 as a carbon neutrality, as the year to achieve carbon neutrality. And this announcement came out last week, together with, as you mentioned, and we're seeing a greater interest in the topic of green recovery. Do you feel that this year is different from what you have seen before, that this is that now we have finally gotten the momentum that we need, and of course that the business community and all these platforms that you've been involved with have been part of making this happen?
Well, yes, I think, with COVID-19, actually, it puts a lot of people on reflection mode and thinking about, okay, business as usual probably will not work anymore, and we have to think forward and look for, new opportunities or new ways to, to make us more sustainable. And with that as a background, then I think the government's announcement, whether it's, in terms of becoming carbon neutral by 2050, or the detailed plan that they're planning to roll out next year with the updated climate action plan, I see a lot of positivities there. But of course, we have to wait for the details to be sure whether those measures can be implemented in a good way. But I think the ingredients are there. And also, I think when we look around society, it's not just the business sector, but I think individuals, they also realize that we have to tackle, not just COVID-19, but also climate problems and other environmental issues. I think you mentioned well-being at the very beginning of this talk, and I think people actually recognize this is important to them as well. They can see the connection, and that's why there's been a lot of support behind these new policy directions. So I would say yes, I think this year is different in a way that we've got a clear driver, and also we've got probably more support than before in some seemingly challenging or difficult to implement government policy moving into the future.
Good. We really hope that this momentum will last.
Yes.
You mentioned well-being, and this is a question I want to roll out to the whole panel really, but maybe I'll start with you, Patrick, to comment a little bit on this. And when we talk about green recovery, we're talking, like Corinne mentioned, we're talking about incredible sums of money, huge transformational activities relating to whole industries, and everything is on a macro level. But in the end, why are we doing this? It's about well-being, it's about quality of life, it's about preserving this quality of life for future generations. And in the end, it's about people. It's about people on the micro level. And how do we make sure that people are not forgotten when we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars in global industries and so on? And I know this is something that's very close to your heart, Patrick, so maybe you can share with us how. You need to unmute, Patrick. There we go.
Yeah, difficult question. I would look forward to having other views from the panelists as well. But I think one way to make sure we don't just look at figures, mega project, is that how are we going to measure success? Could we put people inside the measuring metrics? For example, could we measure happiness of people as a well-being indicator in terms of walkability, a changing mobility demand? Right now, people are so stressful. They don't trust that it is clean outside. But I think going forward, we could shift gradually from GDP, talking about only GDP, to more things, and that would create a chance for us. So this one layer of looking at this. The other layers is that how could we, very broadly, build a people climate that get people's creativity in solving these big problems. Say decarbonization is the world's top challenge for every country, cities, and I think creativity could really address to that. And so the second one. And thirdly is about the infrastructure. It's about for example, a professional accreditation mechanism in the city. Could we build more economic and environment academy, and so that we could solve both problems? As we always say, we try to hit two birds with one stone. Of course, we don't want to hit birds, but I mean, we could solve more problems.
No, actually, Corinne, I wanted to pitch this question over to you, but let me preface it a little bit first. And basically, you are an expert in finance, and finance is not known for taking soft metrics into account when it calculates return on investment and so on. How do we make sure that the human angle is calculated when we're talking about where we should best place our money?
Yeah, well, I have a great piece of news, because finance is actually changing. And I think the reason why it's changing is that, it's a generational issue. I think a lot of people joining today the world of finance do have other aspirations than just thinking that it's a place to make a lot of money. We decided to call this webinar today and the position paper, the Green Recovery. But maybe we should call it something different. I could suggest the rainbow recovery. Rainbow, like the colors of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were decided and agreed upon exactly 5 years ago. We will soon be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement is, of course, mainly known and is known for all its climate targets. But there are 17 goals, and many goals are, of course, related to climate change, because we all know that if we don't solve this one, there will be many others which would be also not attainable. But again, there are many other goals which are also related to well-being, to labor, to poverty, to access to education, and so forth. So even though, of course, in the world of finance, climate has become a key priority, because well, a lot of companies, as I was mentioning, are actually having huge issues with a big part of their balance sheet today, or the business being threatened by climate change. But the thing as well with climate is that it's easy to calculate. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities to calculate this risk, and that's why, of course, then maybe the world of finance has been focusing a bit more on that. But for me, there is no doubt that we are actually talking about much more just a green recovery, and I'd love to call it the rainbow recovery.
Very good. Thank you. I would like to pivot a little bit in this discussion. We've been talking about green recovery on quite a high and abstract level. I would like to bring it down a little bit to the different industries that are affected and which are large parts of our economic life in society. And maybe Anna, you can mention a little bit about what is the focus, at least of our recommendations, when it comes to green recovery. Which industries are we focusing on, and what is the main impact that they have?
Yes, right. I mean, apart from the people and the human aspect, I think in society, the bigger things that are more difficult to grasp is that now that we have the Hong Kong government saying that they aim towards carbon neutrality by 2050, where do we start, right? And that is the crucial question of like, how do we do it and how to implement this going forward? What is the action plan? Luckily, we have experts and professionals like the International Energy Agency. They were very early and did a really good job to identify key measures that governments, any government, should take into account and put it centrally in their economic recovery plans. And one of the key aspects is definitely clean energy technology. Develop, deploy, and also then to integrate this clean energy into society now. So for Hong Kong specifically, I mean, the most polluting sectors, the sectors with most direct greenhouse gas emissions are energy, transport, and also the built environment, so buildings and constructions. So these should definitely be the target sectors to start with towards decarbonization. And then we also have waste management, which from my Swedish or European perspective, I think is very different from what I'm used to back home with the whole complete infrastructure for recycling and turning waste into energy, biofuel. So waste management is also a pressing issue, acute issue for Hong Kong and the landfills that are becoming filled and overflown. Then we have plastic pollution in Hong Kong, which is something much closer to the citizens' everyday life, which we see. We're using so many disposable face masks right now, takeaway food. Now that restaurants can't be open for that long. Single-use plastic is definitely something that may not have that much of a direct greenhouse gas emission impact, but definitely affects society and people. And last but not least, finance, which Karin already have introduced very well here. It's a pillar of the Hong Kong economy, and it's definitely an enabler for all sectors for this change. So the Council for Sustainable Development in Hong Kong a few weeks ago released a report for Hong Kong and the roadmap forward, which also pins down these focus areas. So the energy, built environment, transport, green finance, low carbon lifestyle. So I think that's really where we will have to start.
Good. And luckily we have experts on most of these areas right here in the panel with us. And maybe starting with energy, actually. I mean, this is something that you've been working with as well, Simon, for a very long time. And let me frame the questions around these different topics in this way. Simon, if you would make 1 to 3 recommendations here today about what Hong Kong should do in order to both transform its energy sector so that it becomes sustainable, but also in a way so that it will be economically sustainable and generate prosperity, growth, and quality of life for Hong Kong going forward, what would you say? What would you do?
Wow, okay. This is like three or four questions rather than just one, but I will try my best.
Yeah.
Now, I think, as a background, under the scheme of control agreement between the government and the two, power companies, I think, power companies has been required to phase out, coal as the main source of energy generation and power generation. So I think for this year, the target is have, probably 50% of, energy being generated by natural gas. Whereas the share from coal is going down to 20 to 30%, I think. But then, of course, we've been talking a lot about, can we use more renewable energies? That's for sure. I think that's the way to go. But then there are also arguments saying, in Hong Kong, I don't think, people don't think that we have the resources to have a lot of local renewable energy sources. So we have to look for, sources elsewhere. So then the question is, how can we do that? Should we export renewable energy from, say, Australia, or even strengthening our collaboration with mainland China? I think that's been discussed. And of course, there are different sentiments in terms of, how to work closely with China in the last few years. But I think from a, energy perspective, and try to, make sure that it becomes, a net zero kind of energy, then we have to basically consider all possible sources, even including nuclear. We are already using nuclear energy. But of course, nuclear energy is not everyone's cup of tea. But when we think about, okay, how can we get to, carbon neutral by 2050 in Hong Kong, I think we shouldn't rule out any possible options at this point. We have to be open-minded and think about, what should be the strategy to go forward. And then maybe one last point is how to connect all these conversations to people's quality of life. And of course, people also concerned about how much they need to pay for cleaner energy in the future. Now, just take gas as an example. I think gas prices in general has been going down, but still, fluctuate a little bit depending on where you source your gas. And in the next couple of years, I think by early 2022, there's a local LNG receiving terminal ready to be in use. So with that, the two power companies can source probably more competitive priced, gas from elsewhere, and that would in turn help the electricity bill to be a bit more stable. Because I think the perception is if we have to use clean energy, actually we have to pay more. But with that, new infrastructure, hopefully we will be able to make sure that it wouldn't affect the general livelihood of most people in Hong Kong. So I think, there are different challenges, but we are heading in the right direction, and especially by phasing out fossil fuel for, power generation, I think it's very important.
Good. And can it be done by 2050?
I think so. Yes. If that's a will, we can do it. I think there are different ways and possibilities to move in the right direction. Then, of course, it's down to the details, where we source the energy, how we are going to make it happen. Is the government going to provide the kind of policy framework to support that to happen? And I think that's important. And also, of course, are we willing to pay a bit more for cleaner energy? And it's about individuals as well.
Good, thank you. Now, second industry that I wanted to touch a little bit upon is transportation. Patrick, we've been working with these issues for a long time together, as well as, of course, with Simon as well, but I don't want to give every question to Simon. What needs to be done within transportation to provide green, sustainable transportation, but that also fulfills all our mobility needs and provides a vibrant and nice urban environment?
Okay, I think first of all, we do have some challenges in built environment. Say urban density is super high in Hong Kong, and that's creates the context of why we're doing this. And then let's say when we're going to set a ambitious goal to achieve, say, zero emission transportation, that doesn't only apply to private vehicle, but also commercial vehicle. It is important because not only on the decarbonization perspective, but also clean air. Commercial vehicle accounts for over 90% of the roadside air pollution, and that is because the health impact is so strong. And if you think about whether we spend money on precaution or to cure, it is always to do it on the preventive side, right? And this is the kind of mentality we are having, but we have not seen any concrete actions for the past many years. And right now, I would say that for the next year, there are a couple policy windows that we could, from the business sector or civic groups like us, to contribute as much possibility thinking to the government as possible. The EV roadmap to be announced by the financial secretary next quarter. There should be mention on the commercial vehicle, not just on private vehicle. And this is number one. And secondly, the climate ready action plan to be renewed by the Environment Bureau to be announced second quarter maybe, or mid-year next year. So this is another way to really push that. So this is setting the goal. And when we talk about how we're going to build the infrastructure to get it done, I think right now the momentum from the overall society is higher than before, and we just need the stakeholder to get involved on that. For example, the public transport operator, the manufacturer of the vehicles, as well as the energy side, as well as the maintenance side. How are we going to push them, or to share a common vision, a shared vision that we will try our best to catch up with other global cities. Standard. For example, Seoul is talking about 300 electric buses by 2030. Singapore is talking about all new energy vehicles by 2040, and the UK and other European cities as well. I think Hong Kong should catch up in terms of the policy vision as well as the policy measures.
Good, thank you. And I mean, transport is a good example of one industry that cannot stare itself blind on just its CO2 emissions. It also has the roadside emissions, which are different, that it needs to take care of. And here is a good example of how you need to make sure that by optimizing one metric, you don't sub-optimize another one. And another area where this is particularly tricky, I think, is especially in the green finance area, where since finance is supposed to be an enabler for measures and solutions to most sustainability issues, it needs to be able to take all of these different things into account. And now talking about green finance from a Hong Kong perspective, what is really the opportunity for Hong Kong here beyond just mobilizing capital for its own sustainability issues? But is there a broader opportunity, and how do we make sure that the way Hong Kong works with green finance actually does not optimize certain things and sub-optimize others?
Well, there are massive opportunities for, if I would say just one reason, it's just the fact that Hong Kong is the international financial center of China. And China is the country in the world with today still the boldest ambitions in terms of transition to a carbon economy, because they have probably the worst among the worst, together with India, problems, for instance, in terms of already environmental damage. I personally, I always think about this figure. Sadly, this year we have, of course, I think now more than 1.5 million people who died of COVID, and that's dramatic. But on a yearly basis, that's approximately the number of people who die in China due to air pollution. And we don't talk about them. So clearly there is a crisis that needs to be solved. And now because of this public health crisis and the need for green recovery, at last we have an opportunity which never had in the past to really make sure that the money goes in the right direction. So in Hong Kong, you know, green finance, which I remember when I moved from Shanghai to Hong Kong 7 years ago, there was hardly anybody discussing it. I would go to conferences, it was never mentioned. And then suddenly it started happening, you know, like coming into the agenda. And I was speaking in some of these conferences, and we're usually speaking at the last slot when everybody's going home. And then you see, you know, from one conference to another coming higher up in the agenda. And now we have like conferences, just full day conferences, just talking about green finance. There is a Hong Kong Green Finance Association, which was set up less than 2 years ago. There are already 150 members. It's extremely active, extremely dynamic. We have regulators, which are stepping up. And, you know, it's the SFC, it's the HKMA, which recently joined the Principle for Responsible Investment, the Mandatory Provident Trust Authority, and so forth. So we really see, in terms of ecosystem, it's a good opportunity now because it's happening both, you know, from the top, from different directions. What if I would have one wish is that really Hong Kong becomes more innovative because there is so much going on in this world again in terms of product innovation. So we have a Stock Connect, which is great, which is a way for actually investors from all around the world to tap into opportunities for Chinese green equities, solution providers, renewable energy, clean tech, you name it. That's great. But now we also have other interesting ideas, which I just recently heard about. Potentially a carbon connect, because next year we're going to have the first national emission trading system in China. So maybe there are opportunities there. So yes, so more innovation and more action definitely expected from Hong Kong in terms of green finance. But I can assure you, it is on high on the priority list, I think, of the Hong Kong as a financial center.
Good, thank you. Before I ask a follow-up question on that, I would just want to, remind the audience that please post more questions. We have a few already in, but feel free to post more because we'll get to them very, very soon. Karin, you mentioned, there's a lot of Hong Kong is, a center of as a hub when it comes to finance, and it depends on China. For example, you mentioned green equities in China. It wants to connect China with the rest of the world in this aspect. But is there a harmonization between the standards for green finance between China, between Europe? Can we expect that a green bond or a green financial instrument in one place has the same high standards as one in another place? And or can we expect that to happen if it hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, so it's a very important topic and something that obviously all the governments need to work on. There is progress being made. For many years, we had an issue that especially the definition of green bonds in China and the world were not aligned. And this year, there was actually progress on that because they decided that, for instance, you cannot, like a plant would not be able to issue a bond. And we have more coming up in terms of standards. And in the world of more, I would say, capital markets and finance, which I represent here as an investor, what we're seeing is really an alignment of standards among the larger organizations, which are, like SASB, for instance, which is a Sustainable Accounting Standard Board, with the GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, and so forth. And that's really important for investors because one of the issues when we talk about green finance, one of the hurdles or the risk in green finance is what we call greenwashing, i.e. the fact that, we'll have companies just telling, well, we're green, so please invest, and they're not necessarily very green. And, people will be disappointed and investment will be made not in the right direction. So it's really important to align standards, and it's happening as we speak, basically.
Good. Thank you very much. And it might be surprising to some to hear that coal can be considered for green bonds, but when you realize that some coal plants are very clean when it comes to their roadside pollution, their emissions, basically, compared to others which are more or less unfiltered. That's where that reasoning comes from. But you're right, it's due time that coal will be removed from from the list of green measures. Excellent, very, very good. Thank you very much. And finally, then, just Anna, could you maybe comment on each of these things? What is it that hearing these recommendations for Hong Kong from the perspective of Sweden, Swedish enterprise and so on, what would you like to see based on your experience looking into what has been done in Sweden and Europe in these three particular areas?
Oh, thanks. Well, that's a big question, representing the whole of Sweden here in many different important areas. But definitely many good policies and suggestions and recommendations that are already brought forward here. What I would just like to add then from best practice, if you can call that, from what Swedish government or companies have done or what the European Union has done so far, starting with energy and decarbonization plan, and really to set this in stone. Something Sweden did as the first country in the world was to really pass an environmental protection act and really to solidify these political commitments and commit legally. So pass it into law, and the European Commission has also done the same with their goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, and Sweden with a more ambitious goal of 2045. So this is one way of really saying that, we are taking this really seriously, and we see this as a legal obligation, not only something we say as a government. Probably they can also try to greenwash. So this is really a good way of doing that. And then a very concrete action and act that the French government did in terms of transportation and the economic stimulus measures, that I thought was just like easy and brilliant and really low-hanging fruit that other governments could learn from, is that instead of just bailing out industries, the airlines, for example, that are struggling a lot right now, and just injecting cash and reinforcing their current business models, what you could do there, that the French government did, was to attach some conditions saying that we're going to give you cash and bail you out, but you also have to reduce your emissions at the same time. That's an easy way to do it. And we're also attaching these green streams. You make sure that the money goes to the right, for the right purposes. And then in terms of Swedish companies and what we can contribute here in Hong Kong, I mean, we bring a lot of experience from the Swedish community, and where the government very early on set this landscape where they had sustainability very high up in the agenda. So they already laid out the playing field for the companies to develop their products, become more innovative, and create new products that didn't exist before. And I really think this is an opportunity for Hong Kong as well, to really see this as an opportunity, and where this could open up to definitely new sectors and new solutions. And bringing this knowledge and experience from Sweden in terms of the environment and different services and solutions. And then what Swedish companies have also done this year is when we all were working in sustainability, we're thinking, is this the year when everyone is strapped on cash and nobody will focus on sustainability anymore? We actually saw the opposite. There was even more focus on sustainability in the corporate sector this year. I don't think we ever heard so many business leaders also talk about sustainability and this going concern of making sure that they also exist in the future. And so not only can governments set their own carbon neutrality targets, companies also come out now and set their carbon neutrality targets. Like IKEA, for example, a well-known Swedish company in every household in the world, they have said that they want to become climate positive by 2030, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions from their value chain. We also have Volvo cars, which is also a consumer product that you can see on the roads in Hong Kong. They have also committed and said they want to become climate neutral in their manufacturing by 2025. So this is really also companies leading by example where they are and doing their share, and to be really ambitious with their sustainability missions.
Good. Thank you, Anna. And I was hoping you would mention Scania's 1.5 degree target as well, but oh well, next time.
No, I left that for you to do it. I didn't want to, steal that from you.
Anyways, shameless self-promotion finished. So with that, I would like to move into some of the questions from the audience. We have quite a few very good ones here. So first of all, I would like to visit a question coming from Per Dahlberg. And Per is asking about the B Corp certification. And I would like to expand on that question a little bit. And today, when we look at the traditional mission of a corporation or private enterprise in general, it is focused on certain metrics in the traditional maximization of profit for the benefit of our stakeholders. The B Corp certification is one that aims to give a broader definition to who those stakeholders are, in order so that it's not just the direct owners of a company, but all the stakeholders in society should benefit from the operation of that company. So first of all, are you familiar with this certification, and do you think this kind of certification could play a role in righting some of these perceived wrongs with the current way we organize ourselves economically for the benefit of the environment and quality of life and well-being in our societies? Open question to anybody who would like to comment.
If I may start, I'm very aware about this B Corporation, even though in our world of, investor in listed equities, it is not very often that there are not that many companies, which I think B Corp is you will find them more maybe within the, I might be wrong, but within the privately owned companies and maybe slightly younger companies. But I think it's brilliant. It's very important that what we mentioned, that it's important to have standards, and these standards you want them to be strong and not be diluted. So to have actually a very because I understand from as far as I know, it's quite very well defined and quite strict requirements to become a certified B Corp. So I think we can only encourage that, and it's all the more important. I work a lot in this field of finance. I work so much that I think I want this to become just finance. I don't want to be sustainable finance. It should be finance. Especially when you invest, we invest with, we are very long-term in the way we invest, but also we actually invest with people's money, which they want to use for their maybe savings, for the pensions or for the children. So it's going to be long-term. So companies which go for this kind of accreditations means that they're really thinking about their purpose. They're thinking about their long-term sustainability for the business model, and this is clearly something positive. So they should be able to get cheaper financing. They should be able to get more talent in terms of staff retention and staff attraction and so forth, and in general just a stronger business model.
Thanks, Corinne. Maybe Simon or Patrick, you can comment, but is this a viable way of incentivizing or allowing companies to think broader would it work in Hong Kong?
I think the boundary between the so-called non-profit sector and profit sector has been blurred for some time already, and that means there is a evolving roles, not only companies, corporations under economic terms, as well as academic, as well as government role. I think we are all evolving on that. So this is number one. And secondly, I do think that that would help. And especially in Hong Kong, we have a strong traditional thought among mainstream local people here that a company is for profit. And although the trend is, the tide is turning, but it will help to at least send a signal. For example, I would imagine the top MNC company in Hong Kong or local company, Hong Kong-based company would demonstrate in a way that they would like to do it in this way, and that will send out a signal to the wider community in Hong Kong.
Good. Thank you. And let me move to another question then, which has been directed towards you, Simon, in specific, but anybody else feel free to comment. And it's this, I believe I've asked this question to you before as well, but if you could clarify Hong Kong's approach to phasing out fossil fuels a bit more, because you mentioned natural gas, and natural gas, albeit its name natural, is still a fossil fuel, and in order for Hong Kong to reach net zero, it's that gas cannot be part of the mix. So how do you see this happening, considering the current investments in LNG infrastructure? And LNG infrastructure is not something you invest in just to use it for a couple of years. This is something that traditionally lives for a very long time. And how do we make sure that this doesn't end up a stranded asset, or actually we would like it to become a stranded asset, but as an asset, because otherwise we won't reach our carbon neutrality targets. But how do you see this? Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think it's a great question. So now, first of all, it's absolutely correct that we have to phase out not just coal, but all the fossil fuel in order to achieve carbon neutrality. So that's on the agenda. But then, as we also think about, we are talking about in the case of Hong Kong, 30 years to go to become carbon neutral, and for China, 40 years to go. So we will not be able to achieve carbon neutrality, tomorrow. It has to be a staged approach. So I consider, now this is my personal view, but I would consider natural gas as a transition fuel. And we have to use transition fuel to lower carbon emission when we don't have, proven or market-ready zero carbon alternatives. So what I'm saying is, right now switching from coal to gas as much as possible is the right thing to go for the next maybe 5 to 10 years at least. But also, if we have access to natural gas, should we also consider not just using it for power generation, but for other sectors like transportation? Now, for transportation, especially for heavy goods vehicles or commercial vehicles, we are still quite remote from having like electric models for heavy goods vehicles. We might be still far away from using hydrogen to power those vehicles. So again, maybe natural gas, especially LNG, is a handy transition fuel for the transport sector for the next 10 to 15 years. Now, if that's the case, then it kind of justify our current investment in LNG infrastructure. As again, I emphasize that this is a stage approach. So we have to do it, bit by bit, maybe every 5 years, every 10 years, we have a milestone, and then we have to try to reduce carbon emission from the energy sector by that amount. So I can see there's still a role for natural gas, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, or maybe even 15 years, not just for power generation, but also for other sectors. But moving forward in this interim period, the government, I really hope them to also explore other zero carbon alternatives. We talk about renewable energy, but it wouldn't just, come from the sky. We have to make it happen. Local resources is not very encouraging, I have to say, but then still we can source renewable energy from elsewhere. But we couldn't do it only by saying it. We have to make it happen. So we have to explore what are the opportunities or channel to source renewable energy from elsewhere. Should the power companies start the conversation, or should the government actually make a clear policy statement that this is the way to go so that the power company got the signal, and then they will start all these conversation and discussion with potential, sellers. So I think it's, as I said, we have to do it by stage. And I can see, moving into the second 10 years, we have to be more aggressive in terms of phasing out all the fossil fuels, because by that time, probably we will have a better understanding or handle in terms of having other, zero carbon energy source for Hong Kong. So that I think that's my take at this point. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much, Simon. So I will move into the final question of this evening, and I would like to give this to each and every one of you to give a short comment on. But we talked a lot about how the pandemic has given both private enterprise as well as regulators the time to slow down and reflect on the situation. And this has actually given a boost to the sustainability work that is being done globally. But how do we make, this has created a momentum, but how do we make sure that this momentum continues post-pandemic, which we all hope will be as soon as possible? And maybe Corinne, you can start with this.
Yeah, I'd love to start. I think it's important to remember that we had something called the global financial crisis. Was it 2008, 2009? It was 12 years ago. At the time I lived in Sweden, and I remember that up to the years of the global financial crisis in Sweden, there was already actually a lot of conversations about how acute the climate change crisis was. And I remember going to seminars and people were talking about that. And then came the crisis and it was like, poof, no more global climate change, problem anymore. It's like nobody talked about it. And then it was a very tough years of economic recession with a lot of jobs being lost, a lot of companies going bankrupt and so forth. And then the recovery was actually coming from China, which started investing like crazy into fixed asset investments and infrastructures and everything. And by the way, had to pay a very heavy price for that in terms of environmental damage. I'm personally maybe too optimistic, but well, that's the way I am. I actually think really that today is a completely different situation. We have not seen a single, place where people are not willing to listen anymore. People are actually reacting in the right direction. So like our famous Greta would say, it's a climate crisis. The problem being is that sadly, actually, COVID has been very difficult for many, many people around the world. But we know that, we need to be patient and things will get back to normal. There will be vaccinations, there will be there will be all kind of measures so that it becomes less of an issue. Sadly, climate is not going to get better. The temperature of the planet is not going to cool down just because we need to. It's huge efforts need to be put into that. So I'm personally regarding again within the field of finance. I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing. I think it's a tipping point. We're not going back. So, and with finance, as I was mentioning in the beginning, it's funding, it's mobilizing, and it's directing money in the right place. So for companies who are not going in the right place, they're going to get trouble. They're going to be in trouble. They won't get finance they won't get investors. And that's one way to see how things can get done.
Good. Thank you. Patrick, how do we keep the momentum post-pandemic, in your opinion?
I think very importantly, people would understand there is a co-benefit, a shared vision. If we keep doing this, green recovering approach. So that would be the incentive for people to really do it. And secondly, I think the climate, the world will keep sending us signal that we're not doing good enough. And until we do good enough, those signals will be gone. So this is a natural mechanism to keep us going. But finally, although I'm a blue sky thinker, I think that would definitely need everybody get on board on this big ship to go forward, or else we'll miss this potential momentum, and we might anticipate in more crisis in the future, not only COVID, not only environmental health, but definitely the climate change issue and other things in our society. So I'm positive on that, but we will have to work hard.
Good, thanks. Simon, what will you say?
Well, thank you. Now, naturally, I would say, I would like to see more government policy, enabling government policy to keep the momentum going and to help not just corporate, but also individuals to do better. But I actually concur with Patrick. I think Mother Earth has spoken. I think she's not happy at all with all these. And that's why we are facing more and more challenges. I think it's very clear for us to see. And on climate change now, there's no vaccine for climate change. So I think individuals and also companies, it has to be, all action has to come from people and companies. So it's all on our hands, I think. And that's the only way to keep the momentum going.
Good. Thanks, Simon. Well put. Anna.
Okay, last one here to finish off. I would say to keep this momentum going, large actions and small actions. The large actions are like through the channels that we have. I would say for as long as the Swedish Chamber is around, it's been around for 25 years, 35 years in Hong Kong now. As long as Sustainability Committee is still around here, we will keep pushing for the sustainable agenda in Hong Kong, as many position papers as needed to continue this dialogue and to really not lose sight of the long term, exactly as we did this year when we thought that, are we doing the right thing? Is this the right moment? And I had this discussion with you, Alex, and you were like, yes, you said yes, this is the exact moment to do it. This is more important than ever to keep pushing for the sustainable agenda. And then through the small actions in everyday life, as a citizen, as a consumer, as a human being, the different actions and decisions that I make in my everyday life. Do I say no to that plastic straw, single-use things? Do I consider my options when I buy new things? Do I even need to buy new things? And continue that, in my everyday life. So all the big actions that we can and the small actions that I can.
Thank you, Anna. So with that, it's just for me to try to sum up all the fantastic knowledge and comments and opinions and prophecies for the future that we have had from all of you here today. And maybe I could start with what Per reminded us of in the beginning of the session, that these solutions for how to become a more sustainable society, they will be the foundation for post-pandemic recovery. But with that said, sustainable solutions, they seem almost like similar to a vaccine. And what you said, Simon, there is no vaccine for climate change and many other sustainability issues. While these solutions are important and a foundation, we also need other things. We need transparency, we need inclusivity, we need to bring everybody on board in this work. And Patrick, we need to work hard, just as you mentioned. But what I gather from this discussion is that this is the moment to do it. Now is when we have the momentum. And now the only thing we have to do is keep going, keep working hard. So with that, please, from wherever you're sitting listening to this webinar, I would like you to join me in thanking our fantastic panelists. And also Per Augustsson for joining us for introductory remarks and sticking with us for this session. And with that, I simply wish you all a fantastic evening and a great end to your week. And we hope to see you for future SWEDTALK events. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And thank you, Alex, for moderating.
Thank you, everybody.